Hello, and welcome to another big project that I've finished. I'm really trying to finish all of these best of 2010s lists before 2021. I don't know if we're going to. We're going to do our best. There's some really hard ones still remaining, but I gave myself a bit of a break with this one. We're only going to do 10 books. More than any of these other mediums, I don't really make an effort to read new books, and when I put together like every single book I'd read in the last decade that like came out in the last decade, it's only like 30 maybe. So to do 20 was like the majority of books I read. It didn't seem worth it. So I made the hard effort to whittle it down to 10. But you'll see I also cheated a little bit with some of the picks. So yeah, let's get into it. The first one we're going to talk about is a very, very strange book. One that probably not a lot of people have read. The Legend of the 10 Elemental Masters by Nick Smith, aka Alalilia. So this is basically just a script plus a game system, like all of the mechanics of a game for a JRPG, a Final Fantasy-esque JRPG, written by this cult internet figure who has quite a fan base, quite a following, but of course has never broken into the mainstream or anything, Alalilia. It spells out absolutely everything in very excruciating detail. Every time a color is mentioned, he provides the actual hex color so you can reproduce it precisely on your computer, including transparency, of course. All of the durations are measured in milliseconds. Let me see. I have my copy here. I think this is kind of a rarity. I don't know how available it is anymore. The sparkle, making two full circles while spiraling up, emits smaller falling white, FFFFFF, of course, is the hex code for white, sparkles 100 lumens bright, the same size as the blue one, 10 times a second for 3 seconds. The large sparkle moves to the center of each in a half second, grows to 2 feet in diameter in a second, and shrinks to nothing in another second. The angel rises a foot per second and fades away in 1 second. There's often milliseconds too, but I suppose not here anymore. The scene fades back to normal and a time resumes. A green 306 pops out of Ivan and a green 272 pops out of 2. So, of course, the numbers pop up just like in a JRPG. And he describes these spellcasting sequences that he sees in his mind's eye with so much detail that you can't help but reproduce them in your own mind. There's diagrams, maps, stat sheets. They're all drawn with what I would call an endearingly hyper-functional simplicity, using something like MS Paint. Again, we'll see if we can find an example. Here is a map where he's drawn the new continent of Atlantis. You can see a very precise scale figure. See if I can find a stat sheet. The stat sheets are my favorite. They have all sorts of different stats laid out to the exact precise numbers. There's bars over here that unfortunately aren't colored. You can make sure you know their age, their HP, their spell power, their physical evasion, their action rate, their speed, their strength. And I just love how all of these are kind of as simple as possible, but still end up being very complex. It's like a very strange sweet spot between really putting in a ton of effort and then also not really having the tools to put in something that looks like it reflects a professionalism or whatever. And really considering the depth of thought, I think, behind all of this, behind how detailed these attack animations are, how vividly you know he's seeing them in his head, about all of these stats, the decisions behind every single stat choice, that, oh, this character should be slightly faster than that character. Oh, this character would have learned this spell at that level. It's very awe-inspiring. It's a very, very deep slice of his mind that we're getting access to. That we don't normally get to see, the innermost workings of these fantasy projects in someone's mind. The plot itself is this insane fantasy of power and play, absurd but mundane. Our protagonists, who are like some school-aged kids that get swept up in this grand adventure by Knuckles, who's like Alalilia's imaginary friend since childhood, a completely godlike entity. At one point, they're resting for the night, and Knuckles spawns some beds for the kids, And he goes, well, I don't need to sleep. I'm immune to it. Like the status effect of sleep, he has immunity to it, so he just doesn't need to sleep. He's completely godlike. He can do everything. He just solves every single challenge and every mystery in the book, like, trivially. Sometimes he goes, but wait, what would that mean? And then, like, 20 seconds later, he's just figured it out. Every single fight in the book, he just stomps the opponent because he's just so hilariously broken. And it's the experience of being extremely over-leveled in, like, a JRPG. And if you know Alalilia's content, probably something you've seen before is his Let's Plays of, like, Disgaea, most Final Fantasy games, Chrono Trigger, I remember him doing this in. Pretty much any JRPG that he plays, he goes about in a very peculiar way, which is where as soon as there's a random battle, or not as soon as, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but right from the get-go, he's waiting for a time in which he feels like, oh, my rate of grinding here is really good. The rate at which I'm getting experience seems abnormally high for the progress I've made so far. I'm just going to stop right now and grind everybody to level 99. And then I'll keep going with the rest of the game. Maybe. Or in the case of Disgaea, as soon as he got Item World and saw how much experience you can get in Item World, he's like, alright, I'm done. this is just the game for me now. He loves grinding, he loves leveling, and I think he really enjoys the feeling of just rolling through all the content. Knowing kind of his sense of humor and stuff, I'm sure he finds it very amusing for the boss to be all grandiose and giving these imposing speeches and then getting one hit. So the book is like that too. The book reflects that same kind of fantasy of Knuckles just steamrolling every single opponent. But then, there's much more mundane fantasies too. The kids at one point get coupons for free pizzas at Pizza Hut, and they talk about all the pizza toppings they're ordering and how delicious it is. Or they go to the ancient lost city of Atlantis, where you can do whatever you want. And they play volleyball, and it's like a special volleyball where the court can tilt and stuff. And you can tell that these are also fantasies of Alalilia, that these are the things he aspires to in real life, the things that he really enjoys, taken to new extremes. So it's kind of beautiful in that regard, I think. Just a fully encompassing everything he desires is in this book. Both the highlights of reality and his waking unreality are empathetically spotlighted. Yeah. Alalilia has what he refers to as his mind game on his website, where he will just kind of like zone out and imagine himself playing this limitless, infinite video game with this whole cast of characters and stuff, with Knuckles and such. And I think we're seeing both a spotlight into that game, into that other world, and then also the things he most enjoys in the real world, too. The strange and mechanical writing style and the bizarre personalities of all the characters, that I'm immune to sleep, and just the way that everybody talks, the sort of things they notice, the sort of logic they have, it's really charming to me. It's just so unique and bizarre, and just not something you would encounter under any other circumstances. Characters that behave like this, writing that's like this. Likely that this is just I'm a weirdo and I like weird things made by weird people. Like, I'm into outsider music and kind of amateur filmmaking and all sorts of just weird stuff. But I think for most people, if this is just like a novelty, if it's not actually like, entertaining or captivating to you the way it might be for me, I think it's still worth giving it a try. Just because I can't at all grasp and capture and share with you the actual experience of trying to read it, you have to do it yourself. You have to actually take the plunge and try reading Legend of the Ten Elemental Masters yourself to know what I'm trying to get at here. And I think this is an example of something that's quite interesting, where writing really is the most like doable medium. You don't need to have any particular skills. You don't need to like practice at any given thing. You don't need like types of coordination or certain spatial awareness or pitch or anything. All you need to do is be able to type in the language that you speak or whatever. And hypothetically, you can get out an entire book. And because of that, I find that writing actually has like a lot of the most eccentric work, that it allows an entry point for the most eccentric people, the people who are least capable necessarily, or not, no, least capable is the wrong way of putting it, but the ones that are living like a very fringe life. Writing is still very accessible to them. So yeah, I think that's kind of beautiful in itself. And in choosing this, I'm also kind of just representing the character of Ololilia and all of the content that he put out in the last decade. Ololilia hasn't really been making the sort of stuff that I first knew him for anymore, as far as I know. But these classics will stand the test of time. A banger. Okay. Moving on. Our next one is Taipei by Tao Lin, which is also kind of a questionable pick with pretty weirdo writing that most people find very abrasive, that most people don't end up liking. Also, it's probably controversial because Tao Lin might be canceled. I don't really know what happened with that. There was a kind of a scandal like 4 or 5 years ago now. I don't know, something like that, where people brought up again the plotline of his book Richard Yates, which has like a very suspect relationship at its core. I don't know. I don't really want to get into it, largely because I don't really remember the details and I don't really remember how it ended. But I think it was largely a case of the other person in Richard Yates being like, I didn't want you to try to cancel him. Like, I'm not trying to like advocate for that. It seemed like just kind of a strange mix of, I don't know, whatever. Is Tao Lin canceled? Am I canceled now for liking this book? Whatever. I can't in good faith leave it off though, because it is quite a special book to me. The prose is extremely blank. It's almost totally disaffected. Everything is just flat mechanical detail. Actually, you know what? I should have these books ready so I can show you little excerpts and stuff. Okay, I'm gonna go run and get it quick. La 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 la. It is here. This is like one of the only lists I can do where I can actually share bits of the medium like this and not worry about getting copyright striked. You can see the cover is very shiny. Let's see. In mid-June, one dark and rainy afternoon, Paul woke and rolled onto his side and opened his MacBook sideways. At some point, maybe 20 minutes after he'd begun refreshing Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, Gmail, in a continuous cycle, with an ongoing, affectless, humorless realization that his day, quote-unquote, was over, he noticed with confusion, having thought it was AM, that it was 4:46 p.m. He slept until 8:30 p.m. and quote-unquote worked on things in the library until midnight and was 2 blocks from his room carrying a mango and 2 cucumbers and a banana in a plastic bag when Daniel texted, "Come hang out, Mitch bought a lot of Coke." That, I would say, is almost a perfect microcosm of the entire book. Just very detailed, very flat, just kind of listing off of the facts of Tao Lin's day. There's very small creative images that seem indulgent, even cute, with this sort of feeling of like a very, you know, like when a shy person, someone you hang out with that isn't super talkative, isn't super extroverted, and then they kind of volunteer to make a joke on occasion. It's kind of cute. It feels sort of special. And if you let it, this style of you know, extremely flat, effectless detail, but then throwing in the odd, cute little image, often distanced with those kind of irony quotes, it infects you. It is too late for me. Save yourself. So of course I'm trying to mimic here it a little bit. Like I really think it is catchy in a way that if you read enough of this, your brain starts thinking that way, and when you try to write, you have a million quotation marks everywhere. Somehow the style in your inner monologue converge, making you feel deeply connected to Tao Lin for better or worse. At least that was the case for me, but I'm a very influenceable person, I think. I find myself often mimicking the speech and behavior of people I'm hanging out with and stuff. But yeah, I remember when I was first reading Tao Lin's work and reading this book, having kind of a profound experience with how much I realized my writing was kind of syncing up with his, and my thought processes were taking on Tao Lin's tone. and thinking that that was a pretty cool quality of the book, if anything. Plot is just Talon, or his pseudonym Paul, going around taking various drugs, talking to various people. When I read it, at the time that I read it, which was, let's see, this came out in like 2013? Yeah, 2013. That was pretty similar to my life. And it seemed like Talon's life was just like an advanced, New Yorkified version of the same things I was doing. And it was presented in a way that it wasn't romanticized, but much more like realized. That when I was reading it, I was like, yeah, this could be me. I could see myself in the same position doing roughly these same things. Which, again, kind of felt profound. It felt like a window into some other alternative life I could be having. And, of course, these days, it doesn't really reflect me and my behavior or, like, appeal to me at all. But it's still really fascinating as this kind of microcosm of a lifestyle, that because it was so close to me, because it was so, like, parallel to me, felt very, very real, felt, like, totally believable and imaginable. In a way that a lot of other kind of slice of life writing didn't. But what really remains with me, what I think has stuck with me the most about Talon's writing, especially this book, is just very small things that he uniquely articulates. Things that I remember at the time I would describe as like good ones. And when I would notice these things in my own life and reflect upon them in my writing or mention them to a friend, I would think or say, oh, this is a good one. And I don't know, like it's hard to come up with good examples because it's like a very much in the moment sort of thing. But observations of like the inner self, like thought patterns you notice in yourself that you're just kind of like, huh, that's weird. Like, why do I think that? Or just very small, charming minutia in reality. Talon has a lot of kind of like cute content where he would post pictures of what he considered families of things, where it's like a thing and like a smaller thing next to each other. Just kind of like in sort of a naive, innocent way, like reframing very small things in life that you see, I don't know, like two objects next to each other and you think, oh, they're friends. You refer to them as like the shopping cart friends over there. Oh, that's a good one. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but I this was like like a lot of people do this sort of thing, but this was the first book that like really opened up my observation to those sorts of things and made me feel like very charmed by them as well. And I think these moments at their best, when they hit the hardest, they really rescale your perspective on life as a whole. That life stops being this like huge world of meaning where everything is like interconnected to the social and the political and the societal, where everything is part of like an ongoing narrative of your life, that you're making all of these choices, you're defining yourself as a person. But instead life becomes like much sillier, much tinier, just this kind of chain of good ones, just small, delightful occurrences and observations. Again, really hard to describe, but I hope I can kind of get across the appeal of this at least. All right. Next we got DFW's The Pale King. Maybe I'll just go run and grab it too, just in case. It's a big boy. Is DFW still cool? I don't know. Is David Foster Wallace cool? Is he canceled? I know that a lot of people were not happy with him, especially after the biography came out, because he did a lot of really creepy things in his life, a lot of kind of harassy type things. And I've personally cooled on him quite a bit. I had a phase in my early 20s where I was a huge DFW fan. I read all of his stuff in that period. I loved it immensely. Infinite Jest was like shot right up to my favorite books. But I don't know, looking back at it, I think I've like gone further than a lot of those ideas. I've the things I like value in writing and worldview and stuff have changed quite a bit since then. And now it's more like they just sort of impress me. They don't necessarily like connect to me as much. But anyways, despite all of that, though, I really can't deny the impact and the hugeness, the fascination I have with this book, which is, of course, incomplete, not finished at the time of his death and published posthumously. As a super fan at the time, this came out like right at the peak of my DFW period. It was really captivating for me to know that this was like that I was reading the final words that he'd written, the last kind of new DFW content I would ever get. When did this come out again? Yeah. I would have been 20. And the way it ends, I guess this is spoilers, is with this like very disjoint, very unfinished selection of notes where DFW just makes references to different chapters. Sometimes it's just like questions. Oh, maybe this should happen. Just notes, kind of like describing this about, oh, this will be an arc with this. This will kind of be the end of part 1. This is going to set up this character later. Very behind the scenes, and it feels very appropriate as this incomplete book that is very disjoint and very confusing. That at the end it's just this potential energy. All that's left is just kind of the desire to write that flitters outwards. It's very haunting to see this at like the final point of the career, just this energy. Instead of what I would describe as the lunatic lore of Infinite Jest, which is one of the most complex and creative like worlds of fiction I can ever think of, this is a very dry exploration of the IRS, the Internal Revenue System. He pushes this sense of tireless tedium and exhausting thoroughness, which of course you know that I love if you watched my movies list, into really experimental levels. I'll see if I can find a passage quick. Like here's a good example of just the sort of stuff you can expect from this book, where this is the author appearing as a character. It's unclear how fictional or real this is. I think we can kind of safely assume it's very, very fictional. But it's written in a very, very dry, thoroughly analytical style, and then there's tons and tons and tons of footnotes, and the footnotes have asterisks with further footnotes, and it's just this extremely exhausting for the sake of exhausting, hyper literate, hyper graphic approach to writing, which, like, before he would often write with this sort of thoroughness, like just rigorously explaining a character's motivations or the history of something fictional or whatever. But here it becomes like surreal and experimental. And yeah. If you see my movies list, you'll know that this thing has an inherent sort of appeal to me. Is this insurmountable tedium, this quest for concentration? Because a lot of the book is about how do you focus, how do you still care, how do you do your work properly when it's so boring, so tedious, so unendlessly repetitive? Is that a reflection of the novel writing process itself? And so is the inferred end of this book, which, of course, we don't really know exactly how it was supposed to end, but we can infer some things. Is that equally tragic, of course, to DFW's attempts to write it, because, of course, he took his own life. I don't know. I don't know, but again, it's a very haunting question. Like, what is the actual message of this book when it comes to the meta message of the book's existence itself? You feel in reading these segments the lurking presence of a plot that could be just as complex as Infinite Jest, but the incompleteness of it really shadows it, that you never know, oh, eventually were these things going to be connected? Oh, was this actually going to be like a whole thing? Or instead are these actually just red herrings? Is this going to end up being mysterious? You'll never know. It's all just shadowed and obscured by this complete incompleteness. And I don't know. Maybe I just thought of this, but this is kind of inappropriate, I guess. So, Infinite Jest was sort of similar in that you could never know for certain how certain plot threads were supposed to connect, what certain things were supposed to mean, how the story itself actually ends, like how the flash forward at the start connects with the ending. And not because it's incomplete, because it was intentionally left out. And to me, the most compelling theory, the most substantiated guess at how to connect all of Infinite Jest was written by this guy, Aaron Schwartz, who is one of the founders of Reddit. But he tragically killed himself after being very unfairly imprisoned for a data piracy case. The whole thing in and of itself, it sounds like a David Foster Wallace novel in and of itself. So he's not around to figure this one out for us, unfortunately. Yeah. But what remains, what made it into the book, I think, is some of DFW's most beautiful writing about the simpler things, not about the complexities of teleconferencing or the political ramifications of the Great Concavity and all of the nonsense of Infinite Jest, but just his deep appreciation for the middles of life, small struggles and successes of the everyday. It merges his fiction with the perspective of his nonfiction, which is often essays where he goes to such kind of middle America type events, fairs and campaign trail. Well, campaign trail doesn't sound like middle America, but just this kind of like, I don't know, like a journalistic honesty, not trying to find special dramatic events, but trying to capture these are the repetitions of America, these are the staples of American life. And he would do so very empathetically, insightfully, with kind, understanding, mocking, to kind of just bring some humor into it. And I find in this work, more than anything else he's done, that he was able to merge these things together, that he was able to write fictional stories that had that same quality as his nonfiction. His prose feels rawer and even more himself, I think largely because it wasn't very edited. It was just whatever files he had left on his computer after he died. Whether or not this is a good or bad thing really depends on your tastes. It really depends on what you think of the DFW writing style. But as I said, I still remain very impressed by his prose, even if it's not really what I want to emulate. And I still think he has quite an insightful mind, even if his insights don't really line up with my worldview much anymore. Okay, moving on to something else. I don't think I have a copy of this. I think I lent it to my mom or something. Or maybe I read my mom's copy. I think I got my mom this for Christmas, and then I read her copy. So I don't actually have it on me. But whatever. This is The First Bad Man, a novel by Miranda July, who mostly is famous as a director and screenwriter, but has written a few novels, and this one I love. It's the saga of Cheryl. She is beset on all sides, inner and outer, by complexities. Her life is complex, and everything in her triggers a complex. Everything she interacts with, sees, and does, and it just kind of, I don't know. Anyways, it's difficult to explain what a complex is, except that you know it when you have it. You know when your brain is working in that particular wormy way that doesn't seem aligned with anything sensible or good, that it is the result of a complex. Her unique and neurotic voice, her unusual lifestyle, and all of her strange afflictions are initially very alien and confusing in this book, and you spend quite a while just disoriented, trying to figure out what exactly is up with her, what exactly is going on. But then, by the end, they become all too familiar. Her endearing coping mechanisms, her life hacks. One that sticks with me is her description of carpooling, that the way she cleans her apartment is by carpooling, which is that if you have to go from one location to another location, you just pick up any stray objects that are near you, and then on your way you deliver them, like as if it was a little carpool. You deliver them to the correct location. You do this every time you move between two spaces in your apartment. And it's like all of these little life hacks that people shouldn't really need. People should kind of have the executive agency to just make themselves do things. But the way she just kind of can trick herself into doing it, can get around these motivational deficiencies and complexes and stuff. It's very endearing, sometimes very relatable. The weirdest ones connect so suddenly. When as soon as you find one familiar one, then suddenly they all kind of make sense, and you could see yourself doing anything that she does. There's psychosexual, fantasy horror, social societal issues abound in this book. I don't even know where to start. All sorts of dramatic happenings and inappropriate things and bizarre relationships, and they all filter through her perspective, though. And even in these most extreme moments, you find that the way that she can always kind of put them in her own perspective, the way she can always put them in her world, that her world has this wholeness to it, that even though she's not necessarily like ready for these things, she doesn't know necessarily how to cope with them or deal with them, that it's still coming to us through her voice, through her way of seeing the world. It's kind of comforting almost. Such that even though this book is very dramatic and roller coastery and all sorts of crazy stuff happens, it feels very whole. It feels very, again, like weirdly comforting, that you really feel just kind of like you're going through it with her in a way that's endearing and kind. The plot is something I would describe as eventually everything happens. And this is something I really like in novels as a format, just because they can be very long. They can contain a lot of things in them. This seems like it goes without saying or whatever. But it seems different than like a long running television show or something, because it all is coming out like at once. I don't know. I don't know if I can get across like why I kind of associate the novel form with this idea of everything eventually happens. But what I mean by that is just kind of like all these plots of just people living their lives and like interacting and such. It's kind of a weird sort of realism that it's like I don't know how to put it. Just eventually everything is gonna happen is the mentality that you can kind of sometimes take to like certain situations. I don't know. Anyways, it's like hyper real in this way, that it's sort of an exaggeration of the drama and the events of our real lives. That I don't know. It's sometimes hilarious. A lot of the things that eventually happen are so bizarre, so unexpected, that it is kind of funny. And the book has some very good comedic moments too. Dramatic arcs and chains of causality are not like cinematic. I guess this is where I'm saying that it's like different, the way the novel has this sort of plot than like a TV show having this sort of plot. So there's no kind of like cinematic arc behind it, but instead a narrative arc that is sort of disjoint and awkward and stumbling, that you just kind of arrive in a new situation through desperation or through accident or through confusion. And that things just kind of keep happening like this. There's personal crises, both the typical kind and the ones that are truly extraordinary. They're explored in these archetypal but excruciating details. Like, for example, one of the characters in this book gets pregnant and has a baby, and you go through it with her. You go through all of the pregnancy challenges and pregnancy tropes, and also the joys of pregnancy, the joys of childbirth. In sometimes very excruciating detail and sometimes very painful detail, in a way that again very much reflects the unique voices of these characters, but it is also presented very archetypally, that you gotta get a sense of the universality of this sort of experience. None of this, though, all of this craziness, all of this crises is enough to overpower very rare but very precious moments of sentimentality and perspective, where you can kind of just see the greater scope of these characters' lives. And it's kind of humbling. It's very difficult to describe emotionally what it's like reading this book. It's this weird liminal space between being worried, being kind of comforted, hoping that something better will happen, feeling kind of certain that it won't, not even being able to parse necessarily if things that Cheryl thinks are good are actually going to be good for her in the long run. You feel very invested you want something really dearly to happen that would make you so relieved, so happy. But it's hard to say what that thing is. It's hard to articulate what you think actually you would want to see happen to the characters for their own sake. Even harder to articulate like why you think this would be a happy ending for them. And it's tragic in this soft grinding tragedy of real life, and yet you feel like despite just the disappointment of realism, there's this explosive potential for something truly bizarre and fantastic to happen at any moment. It's such a strange book, but I really like it. Okay, that's it for that. Next we have a series of comics. I'm double cheating. This is the Meg and Mogg series, made up of 4 books at the end of the decade. Mega Hex, Meg and Mogg in Amsterdam, One More Year, and Bad Gateway. Yeah, I'll just run over and show you. Nice little pile of graphic novels. Some of them I have... No. I have signed. Ooh. Ooh, collector's item, $400 on eBay. Yeah, nice stack of graphic novels. They made this one bigger. Why? It's kind of cool that it's so big, but it's like the other ones are all the same size, and now I have this big one. Whatever. I really, really like these comics. Of course, they're on the list. So I'm very happy to build up this collection of them. Both a series and graphic novels. This is double cheating, maybe, whatever. And of course, I'm making a point by this, that this indulgent, have it both ways attitude is respective of the way the characters live in this book, and also the way that Simon Hanselman writes the series. They're both these hilarious train wreck stories of degeneracy and desperation taken to totally amoral extremes. The characters do truly despicable things to one another in these books. Extremely disgusting, degenerate things. And also these very brutal yet understated and very resonant, relatable depictions of depression, of just being in the pits of life, of kind of seeing the other side of all these degenerate and kind of responsibility of avoiding acts with the same characters. Both stories are pulled off somehow. Sometimes it's very surreal, either through like bizarre semi-supernatural occurrences, just from the fact that all of the characters are depicted as, well, it's interesting. The main cast is like a witch and a cat and an owl and a werewolf, a warlock, a boogeyman, like all of these like very kind of stereotypical Halloween-y type characters, and then the rest of the non-main characters, the just randos that they interact with and stuff, are just normal humans, which is kind of strange and adds to this sort of surreality. And sometimes stuff happens, like Owl can fly because he's an owl, so of course he can fly. Or like Meg can has like a cauldron and stuff, and it's not very explained. And then of course there's like lots of very surreal like drug sequences. Here's one here that the art goes crazy and like weird stuff keeps happening. But then sometimes it's also like subnormal, it's like more real than real. It's so down to earth and dingy and non-romanticized and non-interesting and stuff that it seems somehow underneath reality, which is kind of interesting. The world of the series is like very gross and dilapidated, but sometimes it kind of seems cozy in that regard, that they've really made themselves at home. but at other times feels very confining, and you can see the limitations of their lifestyle and just the psychic pain that they're all in, just trapped in these life cycles. The cast grows really naturally, characters just sort of being introduced here and there and then expanded upon in a way that's actually quite compelling to try to figure out how these relationships all work, and the lore behind them, which is very realistically gloomy, that they all had kind of rotten childhoods and stuff. The long arcs that kind of get more into the characters and their relationships and their history are broken up with very just small, funny, crystallized moments and gags of I don't know, just some very silly ones. I like that kind of pacing. I really like the variety of having a book that has, 2 or 3 long stories, a few very short stories. Just like, like the latter half of Meg and Mogg in Amsterdam is just the saga of them going to Amsterdam and stuff. Just just having a fully free variety of that kind of thing. And I find that despite all of the irreverence, despite all of this kind of emotions all over the place and freedom and just depicting whatever you want to depict at any times, there's still like twists and shocking developments and stuff, revelations about characters' relationships and who they are as people. There's like drama. It has it all. It has it all. You can really get caught up in it on just that level, as if it was, a regular kind of manga. The art style I really like. It displays kind of like a comfortable naturalness, I would say, where you can tell Simon Hanselman is very familiar with like how they want to draw. Very familiar with... I'm trying to find a page that doesn't have nudity. Very familiar with like how they want to do like layouts and backgrounds. Nothing that seems like they're stretching themselves too thin, or they're like overly ambitious. I would say things have kind of like a sitcom-ish depiction, just with like the zoom-ins and the static shots and the static backgrounds and such. It reminds me a lot of like a sitcom, just seeing the same sets, going for the same sorts of angles and such. The paneling, as you saw there, was very, very regular, often just kind of a grid of same-sized panels, sometimes switching it up to slightly bigger panels, but nothing crazy, nothing boundary-breaking, nothing totally experimental. But it's very, very well done, I think, that they really tap into the strength of that kind of paneling, which is like the timing you can get out of it by having like frame after frame after frame. There's that kind of 4-coma appeal of just setting up and delaying punchlines, having those blank frames perfectly inserted, just taking the time to show close-ups of characters, showing their expressions. This is where a lot of the comedy of the series to me comes from, is this very well done sitcom timing in comics form. I find the way that everything is very evidently handmade, that it's all like lettered with pencil, and you can see like, I don't know, like the individual drawing marks and stuff. I don't know, it has like a very handmade quality to it. Not that it's like amateurish, but that you can imagine Simon Hanselman doing it all. Like you can imagine them lettering everything and drawing everything, and that's really endearing to me. Really makes you feel connected to the work in a way. But then when things do get experimental, when there are very crazy like drug tip scenes and stuff, just flipping through randomly, seeing if I can find good examples, or things like in the title pages and such, there's these very lovely webcam, or what the heck, I said webcam because I was switching to the one that's called webcam, watercolor illustrations and such. They're really beautiful, I think. They have like a wonderfully enchanting like storybook type quality to them. And it feels like even more of like a transcendence, because there is such a regularity with the art normally, that you just get to these moments and it's wow, this is good. Simon, good job. Damn. You can really draw. So if this sounds cool to you, there's actually an ongoing project that Simon Hanselman is doing with these characters that is insane. It's a very amazing, extremely ambitious project called Crisis Zone. They're posting on their Instagram, I think literally every day, a new 10-panel comic showing one very, very long storyline that goes all the way back to kind of the start of quarantine and the COVID crisis, about that and about all of the other kind of memes and movements and political drama and everything that's happened since then. It's crazy. You probably won't understand some of the kind of like lore and characterization if you haven't read this stack, but it's I think it's still worth the read, and it's very fun to keep up with. I have no idea how long it's going to go on. I guess it's just as long as COVID quarantines are going on, and nobody has any idea how long that's going to go on. So it's pretty cool. I think a very wonderful example of art that people are making under these distressing times. Another example maybe being these lists. Anyways, we will join you tomorrow. That's when I'll publish it, I guess. With the top 5, starting off with this exciting looking book. Winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics. You know it's a banger. All right, bye-bye.